Sir, I'm going to need you to unload and step off the line. The voice had the clean, efficient authority of a man who has said this particular sentence many times and has no emotional investment in it one way or another. First Lieutenant Marcus Webb was 27 years old, range safety officer for the afternoon qualification block at Fort Bragg's Small Arms Readiness Range 4. And he had a schedule and a sequence and a safety protocol, and the old man in Lane 6 had just fired 6 rounds from a government-issue M9 pistol at a standard silhouette target and had not hit it once. Webb had the score sheet in his hand. He had checked the scoring monitor twice. 6 shots, 6 misses, clean paper on the target at 25 meters. He was not unkind about it. He was simply done. The old man in Lane 6 did not unload immediately. Virgil Cross was 80 years old, and he was standing at the firing line with the pistol lowered and the muzzle downrange, which was at least correct, in a faded green work shirt and dark trousers and boots that had walked on floors that mattered and showed the memory of it. His white hair was close and clean. He was not a large man. He had the economy of frame that belongs to men who were never large and who have organized themselves over decades around what they actually need, and from the back he looked like a man who had drifted in off the civilian range next door, which was the assumption most people on this line had made. His hands on the pistol were steady in a way that didn't fit the score sheet. Webb had noticed this and filed it and moved on, because hands could be steady and the rounds could still miss, and the rounds had missed. Sir, Webb stepped into the lane. I need you to unload. 6 for 6, no impacts. You're below minimum. Virgil Cross set the pistol on the bench with a precision that was very quiet and very specific, not placed, set, each motion accounted for, and he straightened and turned. His eyes were pale blue, the particular blue of a sky when the light is going out of it at the end of a winter afternoon, and they held a depth that did not advertise itself. He looked at the lieutenant with the expression of a man who has been told many things and has learned to wait out the telling before deciding what to do with it. The trigger pull on this weapon, he said. His voice was a low, unhurried rasp, gravel on a metal floor. Has it been modified? Webb looked at the pistol. Standard issue. No, he said. These are unmodified range weapons. Standard trigger. The pull weight is inconsistent, Virgil said. Between 7 and 11 pounds depending on the position in the cycle. A standard M9 should run 8 to 8.5 throughout. He looked at the target downrange. I adjusted for it on rounds 4 through 6. If the paper's clean, the rounds are going somewhere else. Webb looked at the score sheet. At the target. At the old man. The calculation he was running was the calculation of a young officer who has been presented with 2 things that do not fit together and is deciding which one to trust. With respect, Webb said, the target is at 25 meters. Clean paper. No impacts. I know where the target is, Virgil said. I'm telling you where the rounds aren't. Behind them, the 3 other shooters in the afternoon block had lowered their weapons or ceased firing in the ambient way that activity at a range stops when something off-nominal is happening in a nearby lane. Sergeant First Class Dana Okafor, who had been running the scoring desk at the range's rear station and who had 12 years in the Army and a keen interest in anomalies, had looked up from her monitor and was watching Lane 6 with the focused attention of someone who has noticed a thing and is deciding whether it requires action. Webb looked at the target one more time. Then, with the controlled composure of a man who has been given an explanation he does not believe but cannot immediately disprove, he said, I'll check the target after the block clears. For now, you're below minimum. I need you to step off the line. Check it now, Virgil said. Simply, without heat. The way a man states a thing that is true. The range at Fort Bragg on a Thursday afternoon in July smelled of burned propellant and hot metal. the flat crack of pistol fire from adjacent lanes bouncing off the concrete baffles and returning slightly softened. The heat of the afternoon pressing through the metal roof of the covered firing positions. The target frames at 25 meters stood in their lanes like pale rectangles waiting to receive something, and the one in lane 6 was, as the scoresheet confirmed, unambiguously clean. Webb was not a man who backed down easily. His battalion commander had told him this was both his greatest asset and his most likely liability, an observation he had taken seriously without entirely resolving. He stood in lane 6 with his clipboard and his scoresheet and the specific uprightness of a young officer who considers backing down a form of error. He looked at the target. He looked at the old man. He looked at the target again. "The block doesn't clear for 40 minutes, he said. "Yes," Virgil said. Webb held the stare for a moment. Then something, call it the specific discomfort produced by a contradiction that will not resolve, made him set the clipboard on the bench. He picked up the lane phone and called the range desk. "Okafor, hold fire on the range. I'm going downrange to check a target." Okafor said, "Lane 6? "Lane 6. A pause on the line." "I'll flag the board," Okafor said. Webb walked downrange. It was 250 feet in the July heat, past the target frames in lanes 1 through 5, which showed the ordinary evidence of an afternoon qualification block. Clean groupings in some, distributed impacts in others. The normal distribution of a mixed ability cohort working through their annual requirement. He reached lane 6 and looked at the silhouette target. The paper was clean. He stood in front of it for a moment. He turned around and looked back at the firing line, at the old man standing in lane 6 in the faded green shirt, at the distance between them. 25 meters was not a short distance, but it was not a long one. It was the standard qualification distance. A man who could not hit a silhouette target at 25 meters with a service pistol did not belong on this range, and possibly did not belong on an army installation. He looked at the target frame. At the wooden post the target was mounted to. At the ground behind the target. He went around the back of the target. He looked at the berm behind lane 6. He looked at it for a long time. The berm was the standard earthen backstop, 4 feet high, packed hard with the compressed history of 1,000 range days, and in the face of the berm behind lane 6 there were 6 holes. Not scattered. Not random. 6 holes in an area the size of a man's palm, at center mass on the silhouette that would have been presented by a man standing at the berm rather than a target frame at 25 meters. Tight, deliberate. The grouping of someone who had placed each round exactly where he intended it. Webb stood behind the target in the July heat, with the burned propellant smell and the distant crack of fire from the other lanes that had resumed without him noticing, and he looked at 6 holes in a berm at approximately 70 meters from the firing line. He looked at them for a long time. They were not scattered. They were not the pattern of someone who had yanked the trigger and sent rounds into the backstop by accident or by poor fundamentals. They were grouped, precisely, deliberately, with the specific density that belongs to shooting that has been aimed rather than fired. 6 rounds in an area roughly the size of a man's fist at 70 meters, through a 4-inch gap between a target frame and a support post, placed there on purpose by a man who the scoresheet said had missed everything. He did the math. The math did not produce a comfortable answer. He walked back to the firing line. Okafor had watched Webb go downrange and had watched him come back, and she had watched the quality of how he came back, which was different from the quality of how he had gone, and she had quietly taken out her phone. She had a number for the base's master gunner, CW3 Parsons, 9 years at Bragg, who in Okafor's considered assessment had seen everything and been shaken by very little. She described what she was looking at, An 80-year-old civilian, 6 shots, clean target paper, 6 rounds tight in the berm at approximately 70 meters. He shot through the target gap, Parsons said. Aimed over the target and hit the berm deliberately. That's what the berm says. What does it mean? It means he hit what he was aiming at. At 70 meters, with an inconsistent trigger he'd never handled before. With 6 rounds. A pause. What's his name? She read it from the sign-in sheet. The silence that followed had the texture of a man updating a significant number of things simultaneously. When Parsons came back, his voice was different, tighter, stripped of its usual easy authority. Dana, don't let that man leave the range. I'm calling someone and then I'm coming over, and whoever I reach is coming with me. A pause. What's Webb doing? Walking back from the target. He looks like a man who's been told something he isn't sure how to hold. That's the right response. Keep him on sight. The line went dead. Okafor set down the phone and looked at lane 6, where Webb had returned and was standing in front of Virgil Cross with his clipboard and his score sheet in his hand. And the two of them were looking at each other with the particular mutual attention of a situation that has not yet resolved. She walked from the scoring desk to the lane entrance and positioned herself in the way she positioned herself when she wanted to be available without being intrusive. And she waited. Webb stood in front of the old man with the clipboard and the score sheet, and the specific awareness of a person holding an instrument that is no longer measuring the right thing. The rounds are in the berm, he said. Behind the target. Yes, Virgil said. At approximately 70 meters. 71, Virgil said. The gap between the target frame and the berm support post is about 4 inches at that angle. It requires a specific elevation above the target plane to clear the frame. He paused. The trigger pull inconsistency made the angle calculation harder on the first 3 rounds. I adjusted. Webb looked at the score sheet. He looked at the lane. He looked at the old man. Why? He said. Virgil looked at him with those pale blue fading winter sky eyes. Because I wanted to know if I still could, he said. I wasn't going to put rounds in the target until I was sure the weapon was doing what I thought it was doing. A miss into clean paper tells you nothing. A group in the berm at 70 tells you the weapon is consistent and the problem is the trigger, not the shooter. Webb stopped. That's a diagnostic. Yes, Virgil said. You ran a diagnostic on a range weapon in the middle of a qualification block. I ran it in my lane, Virgil said. On my time. Without endangering the range. He picked up the pistol from the bench with the same settled precision with which he had set it down. If you'll give me 6 more rounds, I'll put them in the target. Webb stared at him. He was not a man who was often without a response. He had responses for most things, organized and prepared, which was part of what made him effective and part of what occasionally made him brittle. He did not have a response for this. He stood in lane 6 in the July heat with his score sheet indicating a complete miss and a berm behind the target indicating something else entirely, and he had the specific sensation of standing on the outer edge of his own frame of reference. I need to check something first, he said. The memory arrived the way the old ones always did, not chosen, but triggered, by the smell of burned propellant, and the flat crack of pistol fire, and the specific quality of heat on metal that had been in the sun too long. He was 23 years old. The year was 1967, and the place was a firebase in Quang Tro province that had been there long enough to have a name and not long enough to feel permanent, which was the condition of most places in that war. Virgil Cross was a staff sergeant with the 5th Special Forces Group, and he was lying on his stomach in the red dirt, looking through the scope of a rifle at a situation that did not have a clean solution. The situation was this. 2 of his men were in a structure 200 meters to the east, And between Virgil and that structure there was a position occupied by people who would kill those men if the position was not addressed. And the position was not addressable with the weapons available to him at direct distance without endangering the men in the structure, because the angle was wrong. The rounds would need to clear a door frame and travel through 40 feet of interior space and exit through a window gap on the far side to reach the position without passing through the structure where his men were. He was not supposed to be able to make that shot. A warrant officer named Alderman, who had been in Special Forces since 1954, and who had survived things that should not have been survivable, had crouched beside him in the red dirt and said, "If you know where you're putting it, you can put it there. You don't miss the thing you're aiming at. You only miss the thing you thought you were aiming at." Virgil had lain in the dirt for 30 seconds and done the calculation and understood what he was actually aiming at. And then he had fired twice, and the position had been addressed, and his men had come out of the structure, and Alderman had not said anything at all, which in Alderman's particular language was the highest form of acknowledgement available. Alderman had been killed 3 weeks later on a road that didn't have a name, and Virgil had stood at the edge of a field in the tropical morning and held the weight of that the way you hold the weights that don't put down. And what Alderman had said to him in the red dirt had never been put down either, because the two things came together and stayed together. The loss and the lesson braided into a single thing that Virgil carried forward. You don't miss the thing you're aiming at. You only miss the thing you thought you were aiming at. The firebase dissolved. The range at Fort Bragg assembled itself. The heat and the propellant smell and the scored paper and the lanes and the young lieutenant with his clipboard. Virgil looked at the target at 25 meters. He looked at the berm at 71. He looked at the gap between the target frame and the support post. He had been aiming at the berm. He had hit the berm. He picked up the pistol and waited. CW3 Parsons arrived in a vehicle that moved with the urgency of someone who has received information he considers non-negotiable and has organized his travel accordingly. He came through the range entrance with a major who had not been told everything, but had been told enough to change his afternoon plans, and the two of them came to lane 6 with the directness of men who have a specific destination. Parsons looked at the berm. He had been told about the berm, but looking at it was different from being told about it, and he looked at it for a long moment before he turned to look at Virgil Cross. Then he looked at the major. Major Elaine Dodd was the deputy staff judge advocate for the installation. Not a combat arms officer, not a range professional, but a woman who had been at Bragg for 4 years and who had spent those 4 years learning to read the specific institutional language of a post that ran on service records and histories, and Parsons had called her because she was the person in his phone who would understand fastest what this name meant. She had understood on the phone. She understood better now, standing in lane 6 looking at 6 holes in a berm and a small, spare, 80-year-old man in a green work shirt who was holding a government-issue M9 with the casual ownership of someone for whom pistols are simply tools, and this particular one is a mediocre example of the type. She said, "Mr. Cross, Major," he said. She looked at the score sheet in Webb's hand. She looked at the berm. She looked at Virgil. "CW3 Parsons told me your name on the phone," she said. "He told me to look it up before I came." She paused. I looked it up. Virgil said nothing. 5th Special Forces Group, she said. 4 deployments to Southeast Asia. 2 to Central America. 1 classified deployment I couldn't find details for. Marksmanship instructor for the Special Forces qualification course for 6 years. Author of the Special Operations Small Arms Employment Doctrine Addendum that was incorporated into the SFQC curriculum in 1978, and that, as far as I can determine, is still in the current version. She paused. "Your name is in the citation for the Doctrine Addendum." I found it in a digitized archive. Roy Alderman wrote the philosophy, Virgil said. I wrote the application. The application, Major Dodd said, is what your students have been using for 47 years. She turned to Webb. Webb had been standing with his clipboard for the last 4 minutes with the expression of a man who entered a situation understanding it completely and now understands it not at all, and Major Dodd looked at him with the calm, precise attention of a senior officer who has diagnosed a situation and is about to address it. Lieutenant, she said, this man walked onto your range and in 6 rounds told you the range weapon had a faulty trigger, demonstrated it by placing those 6 rounds in a precise group at 71 meters through a 4-inch gap, and offered to put the next 6 in the target. She looked at the clipboard. The score sheet is technically correct. It is also completely wrong about what happened in this lane. She paused. What do you think you should do with it? Webb looked at the score sheet. He looked at the berm. He looked at Virgil Cross, who was waiting with the patience of a man who has waited for many things and has a high tolerance for waiting. Then Webb set the clipboard on the bench. He picked up a fresh scorecard from the holder on the range post. He loaded 6 rounds from the box on the bench and set the pistol in front of Virgil Cross. Sir, he said, whenever you're ready. Virgil looked at the target at 25 meters. He picked up the pistol. He fired 6 rounds with the unhurried economy of a man who has done this so many times that the gap between intention and execution has become, across the decades, essentially nothing. 6 impacts. Center mass. A group tight enough to cover with a playing card. He set the pistol down. The range was quiet except for the flat crack of fire from the other lanes and the heat on the metal roof. Triggers still inconsistent, Virgil said, but workable. Webb looked at the target, at the old man, at the target again. He would think about this moment for a long time, not because of the shooting, though the shooting was extraordinary, but because of what had preceded it, the diagnostic, the explanation, the quiet patience of a man who had known what he was doing the entire time and had simply waited for the situation to catch up. He came to attention. It was not ordered, and it was not performed. It was the reflex of a young officer who has understood something he will carry for the rest of his career, and whose body has expressed the understanding before his mind finished processing it. Virgil Cross looked at the lieutenant. Something moved in those pale winter sky eyes. Not pride, not warmth exactly, but the quieter thing that lives in the territory between them. At ease, he said, gently, like a man who has used those words in both directions and knows what they mean in each. Webb drove to the hardware store on a Tuesday in September, 8 weeks later, and found Virgil Cross in the fastener aisle looking at drill bits with the focused attention of someone who takes every task seriously regardless of scale. He stood at the end of the aisle. Virgil looked up. I wanted to tell you something, Webb said. I've been trying to find the right way to say it. Virgil set the drill bit back. The score sheet, Webb said. I almost walked away from that range with a score sheet that was technically correct and told a lie about every significant thing. And the reason I almost walked away with it is that I didn't consider the possibility that a miss could be intentional. He paused. I've been thinking about that for 8 weeks. What else I'm measuring with instruments that don't cover what's actually happening? Virgil looked at him with the pale blue eyes. That's a good question, he said. It's worth living with. Alderman, Webb said. The man you mentioned. The doctrine. Roy, Virgil said. He said, you don't miss the thing you're aiming at. You only miss the thing you thought you were aiming at. Webb had found the quote in the archived doctrine addendum, in a preamble that Virgil had written and that 3 generations of Special Forces soldiers had read without knowing who wrote it. What does that mean beyond the range? Beyond the literal shot? Virgil was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fasteners on the shelf without seeing them, the way a man looks at something when he is looking at something else. It means most failures, he said, are failures of aim, not of execution. The round goes where you send it. The question is always, what were you actually trying to hit? He picked up a fastener and turned it in those steady fingers. In a briefing, in a personnel decision, in a conversation with a subordinate, what are you actually aiming at? Not what you say you're aiming at, what you're actually aiming at. He set the fastener back. Most people miss because they've never made that distinction. Webb nodded slowly. He looked at the fastener, at the old man's hands, the knuckles large and precise, at the range of the aisle and the ordinary Tuesday light in the hardware store. He was right about a lot of things, Virgil said. I've spent 50 years confirming it. Webb held out his hand. Virgil took it, and they shook once, brief and complete, and then Virgil Cross turned back to the drill bits, and Webb walked to the register with a box of fasteners he had not come in for. And the Tuesday went on around both of them, ordinary and full of the quiet persistence of things that were aimed at carefully and have not yet finished landing. There are men and women walking among us right now who have spent their lives learning to aim at the right thing. Not the target in front of them, but the thing behind it. Not the task at hand, but the outcome 3 decisions ahead. They are in hardware stores and at range benches, and in the fastener aisles of ordinary stores, carrying in their hands a precision developed across decades and a philosophy passed down from men who are gone. And they will demonstrate it for you if you ask, and they will tell you what it means if you listen. The round goes where you send it. The only question is what you're actually aiming at. If you were moved by Virgil Cross's story of quiet mastery and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.